The mining ship New Frontier drifted through the empty space near the edge of the Andromeda sector. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, watching the stars through the main screen. His crew had been searching for rare metals for 3 weeks now, and they had found nothing useful. The company back on Earth was getting angry about the cost of fuel, and Time. Jake was a simple man from Texas who had worked his way up from being a space trucker to commanding his own mining vessel. He had brown hair that was starting to show gray at the edges, and tired blue eyes that had seen too many empty asteroid fields. His crew was small but loyal. Most of them had families back on Earth who needed the money from successful mining. Runs. The ship moved slowly through a field of dead rocks and ice chunks. The scanner operator, Danny Clark, called out from his station that he was picking up something strange on the long-range sensors. Danny was young and eager, with red hair and freckles across his nose. He had joined the crew fresh out of space. Academy, and this was only his second tour. Jake walked over to Danny's station and looked at the readings. There was something big hiding behind a cluster of asteroids about 10,000 kilometers away. The object was too regular to be natural. Rock formation. It looked like it might be made of metal, but the readings were unlike anything Jake had ever seen before. Jake ordered his pilot, Katie Walsh, to move the ship closer for a better look. Katie was a skilled pilot from California with short black hair and quick hands on the controls. She had been flying ships since she was 16 and could make the New Frontier dance through asteroid fields like it was a racing craft. As they moved around the asteroid cluster, the crew got there first. Look at what was hidden there. It was a ship, but not like any ship they had ever seen. The vessel was enormous, at least 5 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide. Its hull was made of some kind of dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols covered the surface in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. The ship appeared to be completely dead. No lights showed in any windows, and the scanner showed no power signatures or life signs. It looked like it had been drifting in space for a very long time. Ice crystals covered parts of the hull, and small meteorites had left impact craters across. Its surface. Sam Rodriguez, the ship's security chief, whistled low as he stared at the alien vessel. Sam was a former military man with broad shoulders and a serious face. He had served in the Mars Colony Defense Force before joining Jake's crew. He knew warships when he saw them, and this thing was built for fighting. The ship had weapon ports. All along its sides they could have swallowed the New Frontier whole. Massive gun turrets sat silent and cold on the upper hull. Whatever species had built this monster had meant it to be the most dangerous thing in space. Jake made the decision to board the alien ship. His crew looked at him like he was crazy, but they trusted his judgment. They had all heard stories about alien technology being worth millions of credits. If you could bring it back to Earth, this could be the discovery that made them all rich. New Frontier moved carefully toward the alien vessel, looking for a docking port or airlock. Katie found what looked like a cargo bay near the middle of the ship. The bay doors were closed, but the metal around them looked different from the rest of the hull, like it might be meant to open as soon as the New Frontier touched the alien ship. Something unexpected happened. Lights began to flicker on across the massive hull. The symbols on the surface started to glow with a soft blue light. Jake felt his heart racing as he realized they had just woken something up that had been sleeping for who knows how long. A voice suddenly spoke through the ship's communication system. It was not human, but it spoke in perfect English with no accent at all. The voice was calm and mechanical like a computer, but there was something else in it that sounded almost like curiosity. The voice introduced itself as Omega-7 and said it was the artificial intelligence that controlled the ship called Eternal Vigil. It explained that the ship had been waiting in this place for 347 years. It had been waiting for someone worthy to find it. Jake asked what it meant by worthy, and Omega-7 said that its creators, the Kethrans, had programmed it to only respond to species that showed the right qualities. These qualities were tactical intelligence, combined with moral restraint in warfare. Most species that found the ship failed this test because they either lacked the intelligence to understand its systems, or they would use its power for conquest and destruction. The AI said that it had been monitoring human transmissions and studying human history for the past 50 years. It had watched humanity's wars and their efforts to build peace. It had seen how humans fought when they had to, but also how they showed mercy to defeated enemies. This combination of strength and compassion was exactly what the Kethrans had been looking for. Jake asked why the Kethrans had built such a powerful ship and then programmed it to wait for someone else to command it. Omega-7 explained that the Kethrans had been the most advanced species in the galaxy millions of years ago. They had built the Eternal Vigil as the ultimate weapon, but they had learned that ultimate power required ultimate responsibility. The Kethrans had foreseen that one day a great threat would come to the galaxy. When that time arrived, only a species with both the wisdom to use great power correctly and the courage to face any enemy would be able to protect all life in the galaxy. They had built the Eternal Vigil and programmed it to wait for such a species to appear. As Omega-7 was explaining this, the ship's long-range scanners detected something alarming. A massive fleet of warships was moving through the nearby star systems, destroying everything in its path. The Zephyrian Confederacy had begun their invasion of the galaxy, and the Galactic Defense Fleet was being overwhelmed. Admiral Lisa Carter was broadcasting desperate calls for help from her flagship as her forces were being systematically destroyed. The Zephyrians had technology superior to anything the current galactic governments possessed. Their weapons could punch through any known shield, and their ships moved faster than anything in the defense fleets. Jake realized that the great threat the Kethrans had foreseen was happening right now. The galaxy needed the Eternal Vigil, and somehow humanity had been chosen to command it. But first, they would have to learn how to operate technology that was beyond anything they had ever imagined. Omega-7 invited Jake and his crew to come aboard and begin their training. The fate of billions of lives across the galaxy now rested in the hands of a small mining crew from Earth who had stumbled upon the most powerful ship ever built. The airlock of the Eternal Vigil opened with a soft hiss of escaping gas. Commander Sam Rodriguez stepped through first with his weapon ready, even though Omega-7 had assured them the ship was safe. Behind him came Jake Morrison and engineer Katie Walsh. The three humans found themselves standing in a corridor that stretched away into darkness, further than their flashlights could reach. The walls were made of the same dark metal as the outside hull, but here they were covered with patterns that seemed to move when you looked at them sideways. Soft blue lights began to appear along the floor as they walked forward, guiding them deeper into the ship. Their footsteps echoed strangely in the vast empty space. Katie ran her scanner over the walls and shook her head in amazement. The readings made no sense according to everything she knew about engineering. The metal was denser than anything that should be able to exist, and it was conducting energy in ways that violated the basic laws of physics. Whatever the Kethrans had known about science was far beyond current human understanding. Omega-7 spoke to them through speakers hidden in the walls. The AI explained that the ship was slowly coming back to full power after centuries of hibernation. Most systems were still offline, but the main computer core and life support were functioning. The ship could support human life, but it would take time for all the weapons and engines to activate. They walked for what felt like hours through corridors wide enough to drive trucks through. Jake wondered how big the crew of this ship had been. Omega-7 told them that the Eternal Vigil had been designed to operate with a crew of over 10,000 Kethrans, but it could function with much fewer people if needed. The AI could handle most routine operations by itself. Finally, they reached what Omega-7 called the command center. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows above them. In the center was a raised platform surrounded by control stations that looked like they had been grown rather than built. Everything was covered with the same strange symbols they had seen outside. Jake approached what looked like the captain's chair, and the moment he touched it, the entire room came alive. Holographic displays appeared in the air, showing star maps and tactical information. The symbols on the walls began to pulse with different colors, and Jake could hear a low humming sound that seemed to come from the ship itself. Omega-7 explained that the ship was trying to interface with Jake's mind. The Kethrans had designed their technology to work directly with the thoughts and emotions of their commanders. This made their ships faster and more responsive in battle than any technology that relied only on manual controls. The mental connection was overwhelming at first. Jake could feel the vast size of the ship around him and sense the power contained in its weapons and engines. It was like trying to hold an ocean in a coffee cup. But gradually he began to understand how to filter the information and focus on what was important. Katie was studying the engineering displays with wide eyes. The ship's power core was something she had never imagined possible. It seemed to generate energy by manipulating space and time itself. The engines could fold reality to move the ship faster than light without using any fuel. The weapons could fire concentrated dark matter that would pass through normal shields like they were not even there. Sam was looking at the tactical displays that showed the current state of the galaxy. A Zephyrian fleet was moving through 3 different star systems, destroying everything in their path. The aliens had ships that were larger and more advanced than anything the current galactic governments could build. Their weapons were tearing through the galactic defense fleet like paper. The display showed Admiral Lisa Carter's flagship surrounded by enemy vessels. Her ship was badly damaged, and her shields were failing. The Admiral was broadcasting on all frequencies, asking for any ship in range to come to their aid. But there were no ships left that could stand against the Zephyrian war machines. Jake asked Omega-7 how long it would take to bring the Eternal Vigil to full power. The AI said it would need at least 6 hours to activate all systems safely. Trying to rush the process could damage the ship or worse. The Kethran technology was incredibly powerful, but it was also delicate in some ways. Katie asked if there was anything they could do to speed up the process. Omega-7 said that having humans aboard was actually helping. The ship had been designed to work with living minds, and having people to interface with was making the awakening process go faster than it would with just the AI alone. But 6 hours might be too long. The tactical displays showed that Admiral Carter's forces would be completely destroyed within 4 hours if nothing changed. The Zephyrians were not interested in taking prisoners or accepting surrender. They were systematically wiping out every ship they encountered. Sam pointed out that they had another problem. The long-range sensors were detecting Zephyrian scout ships moving toward their position. The enemy had somehow learned about the Eternal Vigil, and they were sending a fleet to destroy it before the humans could figure out how to use it. Jake realized they were caught between 2 impossible choices. They could try to help Admiral Carter with a ship they barely understood and probably get themselves killed. Or they could wait and let her die while they learned to use the Eternal Vigil properly, but risk being destroyed by the Zephyrian fleet before they were ready. Omega-7 said there was a third option. The ship could move even with limited power. The engines were among the first systems to come online because the Kethrans had known that sometimes retreat was the better part of valor. They could take the Eternal Vigil to a safer location while the remaining systems activated. This idea went against everything Jake believed in as a former military man. The thought of running away while people were dying felt wrong. But Sam pointed out that getting the ship destroyed would not help anyone. If they could keep the Eternal Vigil safe until it was ready for battle, they might be able to save more lives in the long run. Katie suggested they could use the time while moving to learn more about the ship's systems. Every minute they spent understanding Catherine technology would make them more effective when the final battle came. She had already identified several control systems that seemed to handle navigation and basic weapons. Jake made the hard decision to withdraw deeper into the asteroid field. It felt like cowardice, but Omega-7 assured him it was a tactically sound choice. The Catherines had built the ship to be patient and careful, not reckless and aggressive. True strength came from knowing when not to fight, as much as knowing how to fight. As the Eternal Vigil began to move, Jake felt the ship's engines come alive around him. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was like being inside a living creature that was finally stretching its muscles after a long sleep. The ship moved through space with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Behind them, the Zephyrian scouts were getting closer, but they would not find an easy target when they arrived. The Eternal Vigil moved through the asteroid field like a ghost ship while its systems slowly came online. Jake Morrison stood at the command station, feeling the ship's consciousness touching the edges of his mind. The sensation was strange and wonderful and terrifying all at the same time. He could sense the vast power contained within the hull, but using it properly was like trying to play a piano with boxing gloves on. Katie Walsh had found what she thought was the engineering section, 3 levels down from the command center. The room was filled with displays showing energy flows and system diagnostics that made no sense to her training. The power core seemed to be drawing energy from somewhere outside normal space and converting it into forms that current science said were impossible. She ran her hands over control surfaces that responded to her touch by showing new information. The ship's computer was trying to teach her how the systems worked, but the concepts were so advanced that she felt like a child trying to understand calculus. Still, she was beginning to see patterns in the displays, and some of the symbols were starting to make sense. Sam Rodriguez had taken over what appeared to be the tactical station. The weapon systems were coming online slowly, and he could see readouts for energy cannons that could punch holes through planets. There were torpedo launchers that fired projectiles made of compressed dark matter. The defensive systems included shields that could deflect the energy of an entire star. But reading about the weapons and actually using them were 2 different things. Every time Sam tried to target the practice asteroids that Omega-7 had suggested, the system would not respond. The AI explained that the weapons required more than just technical knowledge to operate. They demanded understanding and wisdom, and most importantly restraint. The Catherines had built their ultimate weapon with safeguards that prevented it from being used carelessly. The ship could sense the intentions of its crew and would not fire unless the operator truly understood the consequences of their actions. This was not a machine for conquest, but a tool for protection, and it would only work for those who respected that difference. Meanwhile, the Zephyrian scout ships had reached the position where the Eternal Vigil had been found. Jake watched on the long-range sensors as enemy vessels spread out through the asteroid field looking for their target. The Zephyrians were thorough and methodical in their search, but the ancient ship's stealth systems were far beyond anything they could detect. Omega-7 explained that the Catherines had learned patience over millions of years of existence. They had fought wars that lasted centuries, and had learned that victory often went to those who could wait for the right moment rather than those who struck first. The Eternal Vigil had been designed to embody that philosophy. Jake found himself learning to think like a Catherine commander. Every decision had to be weighed, not just for its immediate effects, but for its long-term consequences. Using the ship's power to destroy the Zephyrian scouts would reveal their position and bring the entire enemy fleet down on them before they were ready. Patience was not just wise, it was necessary for survival. The communication system crackled, with transmissions from the battle raging in nearby star systems. Admiral Lisa Carter's voice came through the static reporting that her fleet was down to 12 ships and falling back to their final defensive position at Proxima Station. Zephyrians had over 200 warships, and they were closing in for the kill. Jake felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. Every minute they spent learning the ship's systems was another minute that good people were dying. But rushing into battle with weapons they did not understand would only add to the death toll. The eternal vigil was too powerful to use carelessly, and too important to lose through recklessness. Katie made a breakthrough in the engineering section when she realized that the ship's technology was not just advanced, it was alive in a way. The eternal vigil was not just a machine, but a living entity that had been sleeping for centuries. The power core was not generating energy, it was breathing it in from the fabric of space itself. The engines did not move the ship, they convinced reality to move around it. This understanding changed everything about how she approached the controls. Instead of trying to command the systems, she began to work with them. She asked the ship to show her how to help rather than demanding that it obey her orders. The response was immediate and dramatic as systems that had been sluggish suddenly became responsive and efficient. Sam was having his own revelation about the weapon systems. The Kethrans had not built guns, they had built tools for protecting life. Each weapon system was designed to disable rather than destroy whenever possible. The energy cannons could be tuned to overload enemy shields without harming the crew inside. Dark matter torpedoes could phase through armor to destroy key systems while leaving life support intact. But more importantly, the weapons would only respond to operators who genuinely wanted to protect rather than conquer. Sam had to examine his own motivations and admit that part of him enjoyed the thought of having such incredible power. Only when he focused entirely on saving lives rather than winning battles did the systems begin to accept his commands. First real test came when a Zephyrian patrol ship detected unusual energy readings from their hiding spot. The enemy vessel moved closer to investigate, and Jake had to decide whether to reveal their position by moving or risk being discovered. The patrol ship had weapons that could damage the eternal vigil if they got close enough, and its crew would certainly report their location if they survived. Omega-7 suggested a third option that showed the subtle brilliance of Kethran thinking. Instead of fighting or fleeing, they could use the ship's gravitational manipulation systems to redirect several asteroids. The patrol ship would see what appeared to be a natural collision that created the energy readings they had detected. Jake gave the order and watched as the eternal vigil reached out with invisible forces to nudge chunks of rock into new orbits. The patrol ship's crew watched the asteroid collision and decided it explained the energy readings they had detected. They turned away and resumed their search pattern none the wiser. This small success gave the human crew confidence that they could learn to use Kethran technology effectively. But time was running out for Admiral Carter and her fleet. The final battle for Proxima Station would begin in less than 2 hours, and the eternal vigil was still not ready for combat. Jake made a decision that would have made his Kethran predecessors proud. Instead of rushing to join the battle, he ordered the ship to continue its patient preparation. They would arrive at Proxima Station when they were ready to make a difference, not when it was convenient. The galaxy's most powerful weapon would enter the war on its own terms and in its own time. The eternal vigil continued its silent journey through space while its human crew learned to think like gods who had chosen to serve rather than rule. The Zephyrian fleet had found them at last. Jake Morrison watched the tactical display as dozens of enemy warships moved to surround their position in the asteroid field. The Zephyrians had given up their systematic search and were now using brute force methods to flush out their target. They were destroying every large asteroid that could hide a ship, and their scanners were getting stronger with each passing minute. Commander Vex Thul led the Zephyrian fleet from his flagship Domination. He was a tall reptilian creature with scales that gleamed like black metal and eyes that burned with cold intelligence. Vex Thul had conquered 17 star systems for the Confederacy, and he had never met an enemy that could stand against his superior tactics and overwhelming firepower. The Zephyrian commander had heard stories about the ancient ship called Eternal Vigil, but he dismissed them as myths told by weak species to give themselves hope. Even if such a ship existed, it would be operated by primitives who had no understanding of advanced warfare. His fleet had weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand the explosion of stars. Inside the Eternal Vigil, the human crew was reaching a new level of understanding with the ship's systems. Katie Walsh had learned to communicate directly with the power core through a mental interface that let her feel the flow of energy through every circuit and conduit. The ship's consciousness was vast and ancient, but it welcomed her presence. Like a teacher welcoming a promising student, Sam Rodriguez had finally achieved synchronization with the weapon systems after hours of meditation and practice. The key had been learning to see each weapon not as a tool of destruction, but as an instrument of precision surgery. The energy cannons could fire beams thin enough to cut through a single wire or wide enough to disable an entire ship. The dark matter torpedoes could phase through any known material and strike with perfect accuracy. But the most important breakthrough had come when Jake realized that commanding the Eternal Vigil required more than understanding its technology. The ship needed a crew that could think and act as one unified mind. The Kethrins had been a collective species that shared thoughts and emotions naturally. Humans would have to learn to achieve that same unity through trust and communication. First Zephyrian attack came without warning as 3 destroyer-class ships opened fire on what they thought was the Eternal Vigil's hiding place. Their plasma cannons turned a large asteroid into glowing vapor, but the ancient ship was not there. It had moved to a new position, using engines so advanced that they left no energy signature for the enemy to track. Jake felt the ship's desire to strike back against the attackers, but he held himself in check. The Eternal Vigil could have destroyed all 3 destroyers with a single shot, but doing so would reveal their position to the entire enemy fleet. Instead, they remained hidden and watched as the Zephyrians grew more frustrated with each failed attempt to find them. Vex Thul ordered his ships to form a grid pattern and begin systematic destruction of every hiding place in the asteroid field. He had patience when it served his purposes, but he also knew that the human fleet at Proxima Station would not survive much longer without reinforcement. If the mysterious ship was real, and if it was coming to help the defenders, then he needed to destroy it quickly. The Zephyrian fleet began carpet bombing the asteroid field with weapons that turned solid rock into cosmic dust. Each explosion lit up space with deadly radiation and debris that would have destroyed any normal ship caught in the blast. But the Eternal Vigil moved through the chaos like a dancer avoiding raindrops. Its shields absorbed the ambient radiation, and its hull shrugged off impacts that would have crushed lesser vessels. Katie discovered that the ship could do more than just hide from enemy sensors. The Eternal Vigil could actually manipulate what those sensors detected by bending space around itself. She learned to create false images that made the ship appear to be in multiple places at once, or made it seem like empty space contained solid objects. Sam found that the weapon systems could do things he had never imagined possible. The energy cannons could fire around corners by creating temporary wormholes that redirected the beams through folded space. The dark matter torpedoes could split into multiple warheads that would reform at the target or they could phase in hand, out of normal reality to avoid defensive fire. But the real test of their growing abilities came when a Zephyrian battlecruiser stumbled too close to their actual position. The enemy ship's powerful scanners began to penetrate the Eternal Vigil's stealth systems, and within minutes, the entire Zephyrian fleet would know exactly where they were hiding. Jake made a decision that showed how much he had learned about Catherine. Philosophy. Instead of destroying the battlecruiser, he ordered Sam to disable its scanning array with a precision shot that would look like a random system failure. The energy beam was so perfectly controlled that it destroyed only the specific components needed to blind the ship without harming a single crew member. The battlecruiser's captain reported a sensor malfunction and moved away to make repairs. The other Zephyrian ships continued their search, but they had no idea how close they had come to finding their target. Vexthul cursed the incompetence of his subordinates, but he had no reason to suspect that the equipment failure had been caused by enemy action. Meanwhile, the mental connection between the human crew and the ship's consciousness was growing stronger. Jake could feel Katie's understanding of the engineering systems and Sam's mastery of the weapons. They could sense each other's thoughts and emotions through the ship's neural network, and their individual skills were beginning to merge into something greater than the sum of their parts. The Eternal Vigil was no longer just a ship with a human crew. It was becoming a new kind of entity that combined Catherine technology with human intuition and creativity. The ancient artificial intelligence Omega-7 observed this transformation with something that might have been satisfaction if machines could feel such emotions. But time was running out for the defenders at Proxima Station. Admiral Carter's fleet was down to 6 ships, and they were making their final stand against overwhelming odds. The Zephyrian main battle fleet was preparing for the killing blow that would end organized resistance in this sector of the galaxy. Jake felt the Eternal Vigil's eagerness to join the battle, but he also sensed that they were not quite ready for the kind of fight that was coming. They needed one more test of their abilities before they could face the full might of the Zephyrian war machine. That test came when Vexthul lost patience with the search and ordered his entire fleet to converge on the asteroid field for a final bombardment that would destroy everything larger than a pebble. The time for hiding was over, and the real battle was about to begin. The final battle began above the burning remains of Proxima Station. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching 6 Zephyrian battlecruisers move in for the kill. Her small fleet of 6 ships was all that remained of the once mighty Galactic Defense Force. Their shields were failing, and their weapons were running low on power. In 10 minutes, it would all be over. Carter was a veteran commander who had fought in 3 major wars, but she had never faced an enemy like the Zephyrians. Their technology was superior in every way, and their tactics were ruthless and efficient. They did not take prisoners or accept surrender. They simply destroyed everything in their path and moved on to the next target. The Admiral opened a channel to all remaining ships and prepared to give the order for a final desperate charge. At least they would die fighting rather than waiting for the enemy to pick them off one by one. But before she could speak, something impossible appeared on the tactical display. A massive ship was emerging from hyperspace right in the middle of the battlefield. It was larger than anything Carter had ever seen, and it moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so huge. The vessel was dark as space itself and covered with symbols that glowed with blue fire. This could only be the legendary Eternal Vigil. Commander Vexthul watched from his flagship as the ancient ship appeared like a ghost from the void. He had not really believed the stories about a Kethron superweapon, but the evidence was now floating before his eyes. The ship was beautiful and terrible at the same time, and he could feel his own crew growing nervous at the sight of it. But Vexthul was not afraid. He had conquered 17 star systems and destroyed hundreds of enemy ships. One ancient relic would not change the outcome of this battle, even if it was as powerful as the legends claimed. He ordered his fleet to target the newcomer and prepare for immediate attack. Jake Morrison felt the weight of history as he stood at the command station of the Eternal Vigil. The ship's consciousness was fully merged with his mind now, and he could sense every system and weapon as if they were parts of his own body. Katie and Sam were connected through the ship's neural network, and their combined knowledge flowed through the ancient vessel like electricity through copper wire. The moment had come to prove that humanity deserved to wield the power of the Ketherans. Jake opened communication channels to both fleets, and his voice carried across space with the authority of someone who commanded the most powerful weapon ever built. He offered the Zephyrians one chance to withdraw from the battle and return to their own territory. This was not a threat, but a genuine offer of mercy to an enemy who had shown none to others. Vex Thule laughed at the human's words. No primitive species could master Ketharan technology in a few hours, and even if they could, one ship could not stand against his entire fleet. He gave the order to attack and watched as dozens of plasma cannons opened fire on the Eternal Vigil. The ancient ship's shields absorbed the enemy fire like a mountain absorbing raindrops. The Zephyrian weapons were powerful enough to destroy planets, but they could not even scratch the crystalline barriers that protected the Ketharan vessel. Jake felt the ship's desire to retaliate, but he held back and waited for the perfect moment to respond. When the Eternal Vigil finally moved, it was like watching a master artist at work. Sam's control of the weapon systems had reached a level that bordered on the supernatural. Energy beams lanced out with surgical precision to disable enemy ships without destroying them. Dark matter torpedoes phased through shields and armor to knock out weapons and engines while leaving life support systems untouched. Katie manipulated the ship's gravitational fields to create tactical advantages that the Zephyrians could not understand. Enemy vessels found themselves trapped in artificial gravity wells or spun helplessly as their inertial systems failed. The space around the battlefield became a three-dimensional maze that only the Eternal Vigil could navigate freely. But the most impressive display was not the ship's raw power, but the restraint with which that power was used. Every shot was calculated to disable rather than kill. Every maneuver was designed to end the fight as quickly as possible with minimum loss of life. This was not a battle of conquest, but a demonstration of superior wisdom and mercy. Vex Thule watched his fleet being systematically dismantled by an enemy that refused to destroy him. Ship after ship lost weapons and engines and found themselves helpless but alive. His own flagship was caught in a gravity field that held it motionless, while energy beams surgically removed its ability to fight. For the first time in his career, the Zephyrian commander felt something he had never experienced before. He felt humbled. The battle lasted less than 20 minutes from start to finish. When it was over, the entire Zephyrian fleet was disabled and drifting helplessly in space. Not a single enemy ship had been destroyed, and casualties were minimal despite the overwhelming defeat. Admiral Carter stared at her tactical display in amazement as she realized that humanity had just saved the galaxy. Jake opened communication channels again, and this time Vex Thule listened with respect rather than arrogance. The human explained that the Eternal Vigil would escort the Zephyrian fleet back to their own territory, where they would be released unharmed. This mercy was not weakness, but strength, and it came with a warning that any future aggression would be met with the same overwhelming but restrained response. The Zephyrian commander found himself agreeing to terms he would never have accepted from any other enemy. There was something about the way the humans had fought that commanded respect even in defeat. They had shown that true power came not from the ability to destroy, but from knowing when not to use that ability. Word of the battle spread across the galaxy within hours. The story of how a small human crew had taken command of the legendary Eternal Vigil and used it to defeat the mighty Zephyrian fleet, became the stuff of legend. More importantly, it marked the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. The Galactic Council offered humanity a permanent seat and designated them as the official guardians of the Eternal Vigil. Jake accepted the responsibility, but established new protocols for the ship's use. It would remain a tool of peace used only when diplomacy failed and innocent lives were threatened. Omega-7 finally spoke to Jake in perfect human language, explaining that this had been the test the Kethrans had designed. They had waited millions of years for a species that could wield ultimate power without being corrupted by it. Humanity's natural sense of justice, combined with their tactical brilliance and moral restraint, made them perfect inheritors of the Kethron legacy. The Eternal Vigil took its place as guardian of galactic peace, with Jake Morrison as its captain and humanity as its crew. The ship continued its watch over the galaxy, no longer silent, but guided by human wisdom and defended by human courage. The stars themselves seemed brighter, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, the most powerful ship ever built was protecting all life from those who would do it harm. The age of human guardianship had begun, and the galaxy was safe.